And this is really something that we need to remember, is we are never farther than a single election away from a change in government, from a change in policy, from a change in the way the powers that we have constructed into a system are used. And so what we need to start thinking about now is not how do we defend against a President Donald Trump, but how do we defend the rights of everyone, everywhere, without regard to jurisdictions, without regard to the borders. We have this tremendous fabric of technology that we've enveloped the earth with. This internet that creates bonds of fraternity between people who don't even share the same language. But this fabric of communications that was intended to empower citizens and individuals of communities and families is increasingly being used to disempower them. Internet service providers, phone companies, governments, and other corporations are beginning to spy on these things. They're lifting up that fabric to look at the lives underneath, whether it is for the purpose of profit, or whether it's for the purpose of power, or whether it's for, in some cases, legitimate purposes. But we have to think for ourselves, what if we start weaving this fabric in a slightly different way?
Edward Snowden, one more question about the president-elect, the elections. Did you follow the elections?
I did. I think everybody in the world did.
Yeah. So, is the outcome better or worse for your case?
You know, for me, I try to focus on the issues that matter the most here. And while I obviously care about what happens to me, I am the least important part of any of this. This is not about me. This is about us. And when I see these changes in government, where we see these candidates who are extremely authoritarian, they believe that if we have the power to do something, we should do something. We stop thinking about wrong or right. We stop thinking about should or should not. And instead, we focus strictly on can or cannot. These, I think, are civic dangers to everyone. And these are the things that we have to focus the most on resisting, not individual cases, but broad social cases. And this is the thing that I think we begin to forget when we focus too much on a single candidate. The current president of the United States, President Barack Obama, campaigned on a platform of ending mass surveillance in the United States. He said no more warrantless wiretapping. He said he would investigate and end criminal activities that had occurred under the prior administration, in the Bush era. We're talking about torture. We're talking about extrajudicial killings. And we all put a lot of hope in him because of this. Not just people in my country, not just myself, but people in Europe and elsewhere around the world. It was a moment where we believed that because the right person got into office, everything would change. But unfortunately, once he took that office, we saw that he didn't actually fulfill those campaign promises. Guantanamo Bay, the secret prison in Cuba, which he had promised to close on the first day of his presidency, is still open and likely will be on the last day of his presidency. He embraced the policies of mass surveillance, extended them, and entrenched them. And this isn't to criticize this president particularly. This is not to say Obama is what we should be worried about. This is to talk about a broader point, which is we should be cautious about putting too much faith or fear in the work of elected officials. At the end of the day, this is just a president. If we want to build or live or enjoy the fruits of a better world, if we want to make sure that the rights that we have encoded into our laws are actually reliable, that we live with them and pass them to our children, this will never be the work of politicians. This can only be the work of the people, of the population, because politicians do not simply do what they think is best. They do what they think people want to hear. They do what they think will gain them support. And ultimately, if we want to see a change, we must force it through ourselves. If we want to have a better world, we can't hope for an Obama, and we should not fear a Donald Trump. Rather, we should build it ourselves.
surveillance. Can we trust US corporations with sensitive information like our email? Or should we prefer non-US companies?
I'm not sure if this is a serious question.
It is.
But I'll answer it as if it were. We have seen real problems with that. There was quite recently, in the wake of June 2013, President Obama going throughout Europe and saying, these newspaper stories that you've heard about all the spying, they're not very well understood. It doesn't mean what you think. The NSA isn't simply rifling through your emails. Mass surveillance doesn't really exist. These are targeted programs. We're only looking for specific people. And yet, only the beginning of last month, October of 2016, we found that one of the largest email service providers in the United States had secretly gone beyond what the law required, and the law does require a lot of these companies, to scan on behalf of the U.S. intelligence community the emails of all of their customers as they come or go for particular pieces of information that were provided by U.S. spy agencies. Now, the question that you should be asking yourself is not, should I trust U.S. companies, which it's clear, unfortunately in many cases, they can't be trusted. But can you trust your own? Are countries in the Netherlands any better? Are companies in Germany better? And unfortunately, we see a march of these kind of laws sweeping across Europe right now and more broadly the world. The United Kingdom is in the midst of passing the most extreme surveillance measure in the history of any Western society right now, called the Investigatory Powers Bill, which legitimizes and entrenches mass surveillance in a way that would be unacceptable even in the United States, where we've grown quite comfortable with many of these programs. The Netherlands has similar policies. Norway is debating one right now. Germany claimed to pass a reform package quite recently that actually wasn't a reform package. Instead, it legitimized some of the unlawful programs that occurred before. And what we need to start thinking about is, rather than can we trust any company generally, can we start finding specific, particularized companies that can be trusted? Can we look to business models and business practices of particular institutions, corporations that see you as their primary customer, as seeing you as the one to which they owe the greatest loyalty, rather than to some government, whether it's your own or some foreign government or any other place? And can they prove that this is a relationship that you should trust through their application of technology? I'll simplify this just by demonstrating what I mean in a simpler way. In the midst of that same Yahoo case, we saw there was another telecommunications provider in the United States. This is also October, around the same day. This is an app called Signal, used for sending text messages on your phone or making calls that are encrypted, that are protected, that are electronically clothed. They're armored, like we discussed earlier, as they transit the hostile internet. And the FBI used these laws to go after this company. But rather than doing what Yahoo did and simply giving the government far more than what they asked for, they went to the American Civil Liberties Union, the largest civil rights organization in the United States, and they said, what can we do? And the ACLU said, well, you have to help the government as the law requires, but only what the law requires. And Signal said, well, can we fight this gag order? That meant we couldn't tell our customers what was going on. We couldn't tell the public how the government was trying to use our service for the purposes of gathering secret intelligence. And they won. And when they revealed what they actually turned over to the government, it was only this. These black bars are the entirety of the information that they turned over, which are only the phone numbers of the accounts that had been registered with the service, which the government already had. Because the government was saying, hey, pull all the records you have on this phone number. And they said, all right, here are all the records that we kept. And the only information they had was when the account was created and the last time it was connected. Because this company, Signal, this app provider, they weren't spying on their customers. That was not their business model. They weren't collecting records that they could then be forced to turn over. This is very similar to previous times in history when companies had collected a lot of information But then there were changes, more militarized societies that came over, and then they had to hand over these vast databases of information that were used for the purposes of persecution. We should never enter that kind of world again. And the best way to defend against it is to make sure that you do not collect information as a business that you do not need. And these kind of things lead us to a larger point, which is you as an individual should not have to do this. You should not have to make these decisions. You should not have to study to be safe using the devices that you rely upon every day. And this means you have to be political. You have to talk about these things. You have to recognize, right, that when somebody says, don't worry about this, it doesn't matter. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, they're misleading you, they're deceiving you, they're disempowering you. Because privacy isn't about something to hide. It's about something to protect. Privacy is the right to the self, right? Privacy is the right to a free mind. Privacy is the foundation of all other rights. Freedom of speech doesn't mean very much if you can't try out in a safe space among friends without the judgment of this external society what it is that you actually think and figure, is this a good idea, is this a bad idea? Freedom of religion, the same thing. You either inherit a religion or you accept it from the state, but you don't know what it is for yourself that you actually believe in and who you want to become unless you have that protected space. And moreover, right, privacy is not intended for the majority. That's not where it derives its value from. Politicians don't need privacy. They're already powerful. They can already defend themselves. The majority can reshape society to their will. They don't need it that much. But minorities, vulnerable populations, people who are a little bit different, people who are a little bit unusual, people who don't fit in, even in a small way, if you disagree with the majority opinion, you are the one that privacy is for. And this is why, when you hear people say things like that, say back, if you argue, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, that's no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. It's an antisocial argument that says it doesn't matter what happens to the rest of society. It doesn't matter what happens to my rights because I'm okay right now. I'm not different. I'm not interesting. And I don't need to be. I'll adapt to whatever the rest of the world wants. And what you're saying is, I don't want freedom.